well, I'd rather fail doing something that I really am passionate about than succeed and just do science.
Yeah. So are you one of those people who, when you're told you can't do something, you're trying to prove them, otherwise? Yeah.
That's actually why I went to Princeton. Was my college counselor told me I'd never get in.
Oh, really? Well, you have an interesting upbringing, right? Like you grew up single mom, you have 3 siblings, 4 of you guys.
Yeah.
On food stamps at one point, I think I heard you say I think when you were talking to Dan Harris, I listened to that interview. So it's quite a trajectory for you to have, gone from that place into Princeton.
Yeah.
You just have a good mom.
My mom is amazing.
Yeah.
She's really, my hero. She raised 4 kids by herself, went to law school at night.
Wow.
And we all stayed out of trouble, made it through college.
Yeah. You got your medical degree at Washington, right, in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And then you're at Yale. And now you seem like you're affiliated with all kinds of universities. I can't even keep it all straight. Like you're running institutes at like Brown and MIT, and you're doing something at Massachusetts General Hospital.
Well, mostly I'm at Brown University.
Okay.
I'm the director of research and innovation there at the Mindfulness Center.
Right. So where does all of this dovetail into the world of addiction?
If we look at this, it can be virtually anything that gets us into trouble. I learned that in residency, and that really stuck with me because it really defines the scope of the problem. Where we can have everyday addictions, where it's cell phones and technology, and trying to get our inbox to zero, and all these things that are failing propositions.
Well, I'm delighted to hear you say that, and you've written extensively on this subject, because I really do believe that there is a universal theory of addiction that, when broadly defined, is a net that captures all of us. Society's done an incredible job of creating pathways and products that are specifically designed to addict us, to hook us, and not let us go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's unprecedented in human history.
It really is. And the more we learn, there's this accumulation of knowledge that just builds on itself and builds on itself. B.F. Skinner, this famous behaviorist, he wrote a novel about this in 1947, where he basically predicted, he called it behavioral engineering, but he basically predicted what social media has been able to really capitalize on in the last couple of years to just really get our focus so narrowed that they have to look up on crosswalks, in big cities now, because people are forgetting the most basic survival things, like don't cross the street without looking both ways.
The willpower idea, it's amazing that it perpetuates. I certainly have up close and personal experience with trying to master my many addictions through willpower to diminishing ends.
The way I think about this is we have this caveman brain, that was really set up to help us survive. We needed food, we needed to reproduce, and we needed to avoid danger, the eat and not be eaten thing. And it can really be distilled down into a simple process of you need a trigger, a behavior, and a reward from a brain perspective. So if you see food, you eat the food, and then your stomach sends this dopamine signal to your brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. Now, this reward-based learning process is set up to help us remember things. So the dopamine firing is there to help us remember something. It helps lay down a memory. And often dopamine in modern day gets associated with pleasure, but we can put a pin in that and talk more about that later. Not really a whole lot of pleasure in that agitated, frenetic, driven, gotta do this.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the drive to use more when we get addicted. So basic learning process, remember where food is, same thing, remember where danger is. You see the saber-toothed tiger, you run away, and then you get to remember, okay, don't go back there, right, or I won't get to do that again. So that process is still at play. It's the strongest learning mechanism that's known in science, all the way evolutionarily conserved, all the way back to the sea slug. So really, really well-known process. Yet in modern day, it's still at play, but we have availability of food 24/7, right? We all have refrigerators. There, you can find a diner or a restaurant that's open at any time, day or night. You can get food delivered anytime, day or night. So we don't really need to remember where food is anymore. We just need to remember where our phone is, and we can order it. Yet our brain's still saying, well, hey, I'm taking up a whole lot of real estate for this learning mechanism, so let's use it. And so we start to learn to do things like eat when we're stressed or anxious, not when we're hungry. And this splits out hedonic versus homeostatic hunger. The homeostatic hunger is like when we're actually hungry. The hedonic is based on emotions and based on stress and things like that. We learn to take pills when we are emotionally or physically in pain, as compared to learning, to deal with it. Social media is engineered for the likes and the retweets. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it extrapolates out even to things like that are as inert as boredom. It doesn't have to be this sense of dis-ease or some kind of emotional discomfort or something that triggers an uncomfortable memory. It can be as banal as standing in line at the grocery store.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever pulled up to a stoplight late at night and you look around and everybody's crotch is glowing. It's like suddenly 30 seconds at a red light is intolerable.
Right.
Well, we only got there because we've let ourselves get there. And we can say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a good boy and willpower my way through this. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Like you said, that doesn't work.
So let's get into why it doesn't. Why is it that I can't override that impulse and through sheer force of will, marshal my mental and emotional powers to prevent myself from doing that thing that I am so lured to?
Yeah, it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? We're these rational thinking beings. I think Descartes really sent us down a path that was not so good. I'm thinking, therefore I can think my way through stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not how our brains work.
Yeah.
There's a part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's involved in willpower. It's the weakest part of the brain from an evolutionary perspective. It's the first that goes offline when we're stressed, when we're angry, when we're sad, when we're tired. That's why we wander into the kitchen late at night looking for something, because we've learned that. And so we can say, don't do that, but then we just crash harder, and in the morning we set that resolve to okay, I'm really going to do it this time. But that's just not how our brains work. Our brains don't work that way. But we think, I think it's more we're rationalizing, we're like, oh, willpower, it must be something. Let's study it. And there's been a little bit of this and that, but it turns out that willpower, if you look at the people, that quote unquote have good willpower habits, there's some really interesting pieces there. One is they actually find things that they enjoy doing. So people do something like eat healthy or exercise. If you ask them why they do it, the people that are really good at doing it, and you probably know this personally, it feels good. Yeah. As compared to, I need to get in shape to get my body looking this way for the beach.
Right. It's not like an intellectual exercise.
Not at all. And that part makes sense, but that's not willpower. Uh-huh. And it makes sense because that is reward-based learning. We're doing something out of the reward of doing it, not because we're doing it. So that's one of the big misconceptions around willpower, is that if you look at reward-based learning, it's based on the reward. It's not based on the behavior itself. So if it were the behavior, we'd just say, stop doing this. But it's actually the reward that drives future behavior. And that's where we can start to intervene. We did a study with people who are trying to quit smoking. And we randomized people to get cognitive therapy or mindfulness training, where we train them to really just pay attention to the results of their behavior. So when they come into the mindfulness group, they don't even know what they're getting, And so they come in, they're like, I'm here to quit smoking. And I say, okay, next, when you go home, smoke. And they're looking at me like, is this the experiment that you're running? Is this the study? And I say, no, smoke, but pay attention as you smoke and see what happens. So they pay attention to the smell, to the taste, to the feeling of the superheated smoke going into their lungs. And they come back and they're this Mr. Yuck look on their face. They're like, oh my God, how did I never notice that before? Because they realize that smoking tastes like shit. And they can only get that wisdom from their direct experience. I had a guy who, in our first study, we first class was on Monday, second class was on Thursday. This guy was smoking 30 cigarettes a day. He'd been smoking that for a long time. He came back on Thursday and he said, yeah, I'm down to 10 cigarettes. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I noticed that I would drink coffee and the coffee was kind of bitter, so I'd smoke a cigarette to numb myself from the taste, because it's amazing how smoking numbs your taste. And so he realized, well, I don't need to smoke. I could brush my teeth. And he just went through this litany of 20 cigarettes where he was smoking all these things out of habit, where he'd learned through this reward-based learning process that, oh, if I smoke, I feel better, or whatever. And he realized, oh, this is not a good way to go.